All Africans are poor. This would surprise you, but this is a myth. All Africans are great athletes. Ooh, this is actually pretty positive, but this is also a myth. Africa needs your help. No, it doesn't. Let me explain a bit more clearly. Hey everyone, my name's Daniel, I'm an African, and today I'm here to debunk some myths about Africa. Let's get started. Myth number 1. All Africans are poor. This would surprise you, but this is a myth. It's true that Africa is home to some of the poorer countries in the world, such as Somalia and South Sudan, but those countries are poor because of war. Go to any of the other 55 or 56 countries in Africa, and you're sure to find many mansions, many nice Lamborghinis. It's true that some areas suffer from famine, but that is something the entire world experiences. Africa is not unique in that aspect. People tend to go, oh no, how's your family? How are things going where you live? Is it okay there? And it's kind of offensive having that notion that, oh, you're African, so you must be poor. Something bad must be happening in your country. So, I don't know why this Africa poor narrative still exists. Africans live in huts. Didn't everyone live in a hut at some point in history? I don't know why this whole Africa living in huts thing is so popular. Go to any country in Africa. There's going to be city areas, there's going to be areas where you can shop, there are houses, it's perfectly normal. If you want to go out of the city into the farmland, you'll see people in farms. There are people in the urban areas, there are people in more rural areas, and people who live in huts are just another subset of the rural areas. Africa is a dangerous place. This is very stereotypical and a massive generalization on the continent as a whole. Sure, there are some areas that are not safe. Places that are in war, places that are shady, that are like outside of the city areas. But the same thing goes for literally every other country in the world. The idea Africa is dangerous probably comes from the notion that there's no security there, that like there's no big government or massive police in the countries inside of Africa. Every country has their own government, except maybe Somalia, but they've all got their regional governments that take control of things for the most part. But if you really think Africa is so dangerous, why are over 1.2 billion people currently living there? On the news you might hear something about a jihadist group doing whatever, but jihadism and all those radical ideologies are very small. They don't go anywhere near the urban environments, because guess what? If you're running a massive business making heaps of money, you're gonna want security. So most radical groups are limited to the very rural areas. With that said, Africa can be dangerous if you go to those dangerous areas by yourself. But literally every country is dangerous in that aspect, so this myth is debunked. All Africans are great athletes. Ooh, this is actually pretty positive, but this is also a myth. Now, the reason why a lot of professional athletes tend to be from the African countries, the sprinters tend to have heritage from West Africa, whereas the long distance runners tend to have heritage from East Africa, is because the conditions in those areas are much harsher than some American who lives off of McDonald's every other day. There's actually no scientific evidence that states that Africans are better athletes than just any other race. Ethiopians and Kenyans and Somalians, for example, there's lots of highlands in those areas where there's a thinner atmosphere, which means that people get less oxygen in the air. So when people have to do exercise in those areas, they develop a much stronger respiratory system, which in turn makes them better at running in long distances. But anyway, athletes are in much harsher climates in those areas, which is why you tend to get a much healthier person there. Now in reality, the things that make you a better athlete are your diet, your height, your weight, and several other factors, which is why taller people are better at basketball. You don't necessarily have to be African to be good at this. It's a more positive myth about Africans, but it's still a myth, so if you're not African, it's probably a you thing, not a them thing. You probably need to exercise a bit more. Africa is in a famine. Now this is just a weird assumption people make when they talk to people from Africa. They always assume that the countries that you are from are in some sort of famine and some terrible thing. You always remember the advertisement where there's a sad kid looking at the camera. It's not always true. Sure, some areas enter into famines due to the seasons and due to the climates. It's a really massive generalization to just assume that someone, especially if they're darker skinned, is from a place that is in a famine. Droughts are seasonal, but every country in the world has to have it at some point. Go to Kenya, go to Nigeria, go to South Africa, go to so many places. Africa is really incredibly diverse. There's over 50 countries, and each of the countries have hundreds of different ethnic groups. Each of them are all in different situations, so it's really not that great just to generalize that everybody is in some sort of famine or some sort of economic or some sort of agricultural struggle. Africa is corrupt. Now this one is kind of true. Africa has a lot of countries where the governments do tend to do shady things. There's actually an international corruption ranking database, which ranks 180 countries based on how much corruption is visible in their public sector. Lo and behold, some of the lower countries tend to be African countries. But it's not surprising to see a lot of non-African countries are also down on that list. And if you want to say, okay, sure, but Africa in general is corrupt, well, there are a bunch of countries that are not corrupt as well. Corruption is less of an Africa issue, and it's more of a world issue. What's dangerous about this is when people have the assumption that Africa is corrupt just in general, it makes people less empathetic, I guess, because they think, oh, the government is corrupt, what's the point of caring about Africa? And it's better to have a bit more research on the topic, on the country specifically, and especially on the leadership as well. Africa is a desert. Now this one I can kind of understand. Part of Africa is a desert. It's called the Sahara. It's a massive desert that covers most of North and West Africa. However, there's this thing called Sub-Saharan Africa. Egypt and Libya are probably the clearest examples of African countries that are mostly desert, but there's also Ethiopia, there's Somalia, there's Nigeria, there's Uganda, there's South Sudan, there's the Southern African Republic, there's Congo. All these areas are not deserts. They've actually got a lot of tropical regions and also some safari regions. Basically, there are a lot of tropical and subtropical areas in Africa, and it's not all a desert. It's like how people think that Australia is mostly desert, which it actually is, and how Canada is a frozen wasteland, which it actually is. Africans are technologically behind. I go back to Ethiopia because that's where I'm most familiar, but they definitely have technology. You just need to go to the right places. People who even live in those more traditional lifestyles still have some connection to the internet just so that they can see what is going on around the world. I remember during a trip through Ethiopia while we were driving down a highway, there were these huts towards the side of the road, and you could actually see a receiver on top of one of the huts. So maybe the idea that they're technologically behind is a bit outdated. Africans are black. No, Africans come in a wide variety of different shades and colours. I don't even know if you can consider me black. I've got a skin tone that's commonly called Habesha, which is a general set of features that are around the Ethiopia, Eritrea, and kind of Uganda, Somalia area. I look very different to an Egyptian or to a South African, and if you put me side by side to a South Sudanese person or a Nigerian, we have very different colours. So labeling all of Africa as black is again another massive generalization. I hope that over time people become a bit more aware of how diverse Africa actually is. It's really strange to have this idea that Africa as a continent has some similarities that carry on over the entire area. I mean, if you consider Europe, there's the British, there's the French, there's the Spanish. There are so many different cultures and so many different types of people. You need to really acknowledge their differences and be a bit more appreciative of the people who you know. It really comes off as ignorant to just assume that all of Africa is the same in any way, because even within a single country in Africa, there are going to be groups, there are going to be ethnic groups that have next to no similarities between each other. China is taking over Africa. Well, this one is a bit more on the political side, but foreigners see China providing infrastructure like dams, railways, and other stuff in Africa, and they think Africa can't hope to pay for all this, so China must be putting them in some massive debt that they can't pay back. Now, in reality, these deals that China makes with African countries are very clear and very succinct. China would have to be very negligent to put in billions yearly into African infrastructure without making it exceptionally clear what the terms of the deal are. The actual issue with China in Africa is not that they're putting the countries in debt to just take them over in the future. When they make these deals with African countries, Africans are more inclined to side with them with international issues, such as the state of Taiwan or North Korea, or any issues that China have a big influence over that goes against the West. But in reality, African countries are aware of what they give in a trade with China. It's made very clear to them, and at no point are those countries putting themselves in so much debt that China is just going to go, well, we're going to take over all your resources or something. Colonialism ruined Africa. A lot of people like to look at Africa with all these generalizations that they are poor, that they're in famine, that they're in difficult situations, and they like to just attribute it all to colonialism. Countries can prosper after colonialism. India is a great example of this. Nigeria, an African country, makes billions and billions annually in their GDP. So it's not fair to say that any African problem is because of colonialism. You can't just generalize an entire continent and then generalize something that hasn't happened in over 100 years and then just assume, oh, all those problems are because of that. That's just not productive. And on to the last myth. Africa needs your help. No, it doesn't. This idea that Africa is this hopeless, helpless, starving child in a village somewhere that desperately needs your money or that desperately needs your food aid to survive is very old-fashioned. It's been propagandized by a whole lot of these not-for-profit organizations, but in reality, the money you donate to these not-for-profit organizations barely make any difference to Africa. Sure, it might help 1 or 2 starving children in some very desolate areas, but if you really want to provide for Africa, the best way would be to travel there, to invest in their businesses, to actually treat the continent like what it is, a functioning continent full of lots and lots of countries which can provide services to the world. I hear this joke incredibly often when people drop food or waste food in some aspect. They go, don't waste that, that could feed 1 million starving Africans. That could feed 100 starving Africans. A starving Ethiopian family could use that food for weeks. I assume you don't participate in those offensive jokes. Some people find it funny at the time, maybe because they've been numbed from hearing all these stories about starving people. If you donate a couple of bucks to some not-for-profit organization once a week or once a month, that's not going to do much to help Africans overall. Africa doesn't actually need your help, it can do fine without you. But if you really want to provide and be helpful, then there are much better ways than just donating money to charity. Africa has its own fair share of incredible places. There's Kilimanjaro, there's actual blue lava. Africa has so many different varieties of people, of cultures, so many incredible sights to see, things that would be amazing. All you have to do is travel there. You'd be providing way more to Africa than you would just by donating to charities. If you're going to take anything from this video, take this. Africa is an amazing place with a lot of incredible experiences. Just be a little more aware of the stereotypes of the continent and try not to let it cloud your judgment.